Hello, good afternoon. Come on in, have a seat. We're going to talk about refining and decarbonization. So we are going to talk about the monumental task of decarbonizing the downstream. 100 million barrel a day of oil demand around the world, much of that in the mobility sector, and a well-established, very efficient supply chain, crude oil refining down through chemicals. As we think about the decarbonizing that, there's a lot of pathways, there's a lot of different technology and routes and decisions to be made. There's policies that vary, by country, by market, policies that are maybe not fully established or all the rules written. So a lot of challenges. This is not going to be easy, right? At the same time, right, there's optimism that we can do this. We've done challenges, overcome many challenges in the past, and there's action. There's actually things going on, right? So as I said on an earlier panel, this is the energy transition, right? Today, what you're going to hear is the pioneering days, the early days of the energy transition. I've got a great panel to take us through this. I'll do a quick introduction. Their details are in the app as usual. So to my left, Nadia Al-Hajji, CEO of PIC Chemical in Kuwait. Alfred Stern. Sorry, I got these out of order. Sorry. Jeff Ricker, President CEO of Motiva, subsidiary of Aramco, of course. Alfred Stern, CEO of OMV. And then on the end is my colleague, Dan Evans, Vice President, who does our refining analysis for S&P Global Commodity Insight. So let me get started. Maybe I'll come to you, Nadia. You're the closest to me, so you're first up. So from your vantage point, right, where you sit in the markets you serve, right, how have you seen the industry discussions and really the strategies around decarbonizing and sustainability change over the last year or two?
Okay, maybe we'll start with one basic concept, that climate change is undeniable. We've all seen it, we've seen its effects, and I think we as an industry are all doing our part to try and combat or at least address, and minimize our environmental footprint from all our activities. In terms of decarbonization, I don't think it's new. It's a concept that we've been working on in terms of energy transition, reducing our environmental footprint, has been going on for the last several decades. As an industry, I think we're heavily regulated, and I think we do behave responsibly. And so those kind of initiatives, whether you're talking about, addressing flaring or, managing efficiency, all of the initiatives that we do to try and minimize our impact have been going on for many, many years. I think what's different now is that with the energy transition coming into focus, it has now become stated on everybody's strategy, and it's stated right alongside your core business stated objectives. And so it's kind of come a little bit more into focus and a little bit more visible on everybody's strategy and objectives, and it's a lot more vocal about what we're trying to do. So I think we're committed to continue that journey. I don't think although it's a new label for an old journey, it's still something that we are very much committed to. We at KPC in Kuwait and the K group of companies have come out during the last year with our stated objectives on energy transition and our plans toward energy transition. And so those address all of the items that you would expect to see there, whether it's carbon capture and using that for enhanced oil recovery and things like that. The biofuels, the SAF, or introducing green chemicals and all of that. all of those initiatives are very much part of our energy transition, the ones that are drop-in solutions and those that are a little bit more intense. And so I think we're not the only ones that have come out with our 2050 strategy. So I think that has definitely changed. I think another thing that has changed, aside from having the stated objectives, is the fact that it used to pay for itself. Right. So all of the initiatives that we used to do were self-sustaining because they made economic sense. When you're saving on flaring, that material's going back into your industry, and so it was sustained and economic to do so. I think that has definitely changed, and now we're being asked to pay in advance for initiatives that might not make economic sense today, on the hopes that you get a premium in the future, or that it would yield returns on investment sometime in the future. So that element of risk, I think, has been introduced that wasn't there previously. And so we have to figure a way of how to continue the journey in a way that's responsible and sustainable, and not sort of focused or relying on government incentives to keep it going, or tax, or taxpayers paying the higher costs for the same, essentially, services or materials that they were getting previously at a very different cost, which really poses the question as to whether or not this is sustainable. Right. And maybe just one last point on the fact that everybody's so focused on this energy transition, rightfully so. But I think we need to do a little bit better about communicating what is the environmental footprint that is generated by the alternative that's being sold as supremely clean, and I don't think it's as clean as what it's claimed to be. There's a huge amount of energy that's involved in producing a typical windmill or a solar panel that is often overlooked or washed over greenwashing. And I think we need to do a little bit better about educating the public on that aspect.
Yeah, measuring and monitoring that, right? So it sounds like setting targets, right, is a key, right? So that's the first step. So Jeff, maybe your perspective, right? What what you see underway in terms of emissions reduction, and what are we getting right, and what do we need to focus on going forward?
Yeah. I'll talk about the refining business because that's what I know.
Please.
Yeah. So
that's why we're here.
In oil refining, of course, we're in the business of producing, among other things, liquid fuels, and I think it's important to say that liquid fuels really do and should play a big part, an important part, in a decarbonization pathway, and for a number of reasons, and not least among them, the liquid fuels, they drop right into the existing infrastructure that we have. They drop right into the existing transport modes that we have. And there's a lot of runway still in decarbonization of liquid fuels. There's things that I see around the industry, refiners doing ahead of the refinery, inside the refinery gates, and outside of the refinery gates. Ahead of the refinery, you source lower carbon feedstocks, including thinking about the carbon intensity of the crude oils that you run in the refinery. They're different. Looking at the non-carbon feedstocks and co-feeds and recycled stocks. Inside the refinery gates, there's still a lot of way to go in reducing the carbon intensity of refining operations and processes. And after the refinery gates, obviously we do a lot of blending of lower carbon stocks, blend stocks into the final products, and that will go on, and it has more room to run as well. So I think there's a lot that the industry is doing. My company is doing a lot of those things. Maybe I'll talk about it later, but that's what I see.
Yeah. No, thanks. That's kind of block and tackling, right? In some ways, right? Like what Nadia was saying, right? This isn't new, right? We know how to do this.
It's not new and exciting, but it's an important part of the decarbonization.
It is exciting. It can be. All right. So Alfred, maybe just give us a little your thoughts. You've kind of have a strategy, right? That's if I can say it, kind of pivoted, maybe away from traditional refinery or headed that way. So maybe, how do you see the decarbonizing of your business and markets?
Yeah, so I work for OMV, and OMV is an integrated company across 3 sectors: energy, fuels, and chemicals. And we have developed a strategy that we launched in the beginning of 2022 that will make OMV a net zero company by 2050 in all 3 scopes, so scope 1, 2, and 3. And the way we want to address that is by changing our product portfolio and the feedstock portfolio in order to make sure we decarbonize our operations, right? So many activities going on, but I just want to pick out a few of those examples in the 3 different segments, one each, right? You take the energy segment where we are producing gas today. We are delivering this to industrial customers so that households can, for example, heat their households or cook with it. At the same time, we have launched a joint venture last year with a district heating provider in Vienna, and we are developing geothermal heating so that the heat tomorrow will come not from gas, but from geothermal heating, CO2-free, and we can actually use that new form of energy in order to do that. So that's one decarbonization example in the energy sector. In the fuel sector, today we are obviously producing mostly road fuels. About 55% of our product portfolio from the refineries is for road fuels, and we are looking by 2030 that it will only be about 40% of the production of our refineries will go into road fuels. We will compensate some of this reduction by developing sustainable fuels, about 700,000 tons of sustainable aviation fuels by 2030. We have already started in 2022 to sell small quantities of sustainable aviation fuels to airlines, and last year we actually also started to sell sustainable aviation fuel certificates to Microsoft that are using those certificates to decarbonize their business travel and their logistics. So that's a really interesting field that we are going to ramp up. We are starting there with bio oils to refine those into sustainable fuels. But longer term, of course, we are also going to deploy other technologies. And in the chemical sector, what we are doing there is we are launching a technology that we have developed over the last 10 years in OMV. It's called ReOil technology. It's a chemical recycling technology. So basically you take plastic waste and you are breaking this plastic waste back into the chemical building blocks, and you then have circular chemical building blocks that you can use just like the building blocks that you derive from fossil fuels. But it is circular, it's reducing waste, it's taking waste streams out of incineration plants and helping to decarbonize the incineration plants, and it is making the chemical world circular. Our goal is that by 2030, we will have about 2 million tons of sustainable plastics, or sustainable chemicals actually in our portfolio, that are then coming from mechanical recycling, chemical recycling, and sustainable feedstocks. So those are 3 examples how we are decarbonizing both our product portfolio and our feedstock portfolio. In energy, that was geothermal. In fuels, it was sustainable fuels and feedstocks, and in chemicals, it was recycling of the chemical materials, in particular plastics, that will help us to decarbonize. Because, of course, on scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, we are doing everything like was said before, that we have been doing before. We are doing it maybe faster today. We are decarbonizing our hydrogen supply by bringing on stream our first electrolyzer this year of 10 megawatts, so that we make green hydrogen instead of the steam methane reformed hydrogen that we use and produce today in our refinery. And we'll ramp this up as we go forward. So we are also signing a lot of PPAs and partly also investing into renewable power to reduce our scope 2 emissions. But those are a lot of efficiency improvements, electrification, switching to renewable power in order to bring scope 1 and scope 2 emissions down. But in the end, the biggest part of our emissions in OMV are scope 3 emissions, so from the end use of our products, and that's why it's so critical for us to change the product and the feedstock portfolio.
Right. And how have your customers responded? Are you working closely with them on these steps to, and are they, you know, are they willing to pay more, or
Yeah,
how are you addressing kind of that challenge?
Great question, because of course, if you look at the oil and gas industry today, right, we have, it's a huge industry with excellent engineers that have worked very hard for the last 100+ years to make those supply chains as efficient as possible with a lot of success. So we have an innovator's dilemma. We are starting up new processes like this geothermal, like sustainable fuels, like recycled plastics, where we are trying to compete with fully optimized supply chains. That makes for a cost difference, right? But we are running something, I think there's two critical things in this. One is we have integrated sustainability as an innovation and growth driver in our strategy. So it's not something that we do because we must do it. It's something that we do because we believe those will be the markets of the future. And if we don't move, others will. So that's point one. And the second point around this is really that we have that we are doing what we call a responsible transformation, and that means today the majority of our product that we supply is fossil-based. There's still a lot of combustion engine out there. There's still a lot of people that are heating their houses with gas and cooking with gas. So we intend to supply this as long as the demand is there. But we can see on the horizon, particularly in the markets where we are active, that the demand for those products will reduce. So the new products will then be important, will be the revenue makers of the future. And this is, we are using the time now to ramp it up, right? Take sustainable fuels. There's mandates already there. 2025 in Europe, a minimum of 2% of sustainable aviation fuels needs to be used by the airlines. 2030, that's going up to 6%, and already 2035, it will be 20%. So it's a huge ramp, and the challenge that we actually have is to build the supply chains and to build the capacities to make this happen. Since there's regulatory mandates, of course, people, we need to fulfill them, and it's a, let's say, demand-driven in a short market scenario where people are paying for it, which will allow us to scale, to further develop the technology and to bring the costs down as we go forward. Very similar for circular economy, recycled plastics. It's a smaller percentage. There's consumers out there that are demanding this. There's customers and customers out there that really understand that they need to switch. There's coalitions of the willing. Would it work for 100% of the market today?
Sure.
No, it wouldn't. But it does work to ramp up and to innovate on the way and to bring the cost down.
That makes sense, makes sense. So thanks. That's very interesting. So Dan, you go around the world, you run a global team, you see a lot of different markets, a lot of different policy frameworks. I mean, how do you think about this? And kind of how would you summarize, right, kind of the those different markets, you know, relative to what you've heard here on stage?
Yeah, I think there's some, as you've heard right there, I think some areas where there is strong agreement and areas where there's different things happening in different parts of the world. I think where there's agreement is absolutely where Nadia started, which is nobody's pretending there's not a problem here, right? Everybody is seeing that there is a need to act. And in the long term, right, everybody has the same goal. I think also another common point is people are seeing the same things in the toolkit, right? It might be what Jeff called the boring stuff. I disagree, right? But those incremental moves, right down to more radical transformation that Alfred talked about. So from the technology standpoint, I think people are seeing similar things that are available. I think the other thing that is common is the need to balance the core business with, you know, pivoting into these new areas, right? How do you get that balance right in terms of capital allocation, particularly? But I think probably the area where we see the biggest difference is the pace, right? The pace of change. Everybody's portfolio is different. Everybody's operating environment is different, and that causes you to act with different levels of urgency. But I think one of the other major differences is just how people are seeing this trade-off between sustainability and profitability, and whether ultimately the two will be compatible or whether you have to take a hit, right? Whether you have to take a hit on profitability. And if you believe that you do, whether you do that in the short term for the long-term gain, or you wait until the projects are creating value.
Right. That's great. Thanks. That's good perspective. So I wanted to maybe shift a little bit, maybe markets and policies, and get your perspective, Nadia, on you sell products. You're based in Kuwait. You sell products around the world into all sorts of different markets. How are you seeing some of the plastic recycle policies, some of the other sustainability, right? And how are you addressing those different markets?
So again, talking on behalf of KPC and PIC, which is the petrochemical arm of KPC Group, we are investing in sustainable chemicals. So we have initiatives on green chemicals and blending bio feedstocks into virgin feed and into recyclable material into products, and working on renewables and all of that, lowering again the carbon footprint, and working on having that green version of plastic products, maintaining their qualities or their properties that we were producing originally. I think where regulation and policy is concerned, there's still a gap between industry and the policymakers. And specifically, when we're talking about recycling, I think where they're getting it wrong is that they're heavily focused on regulating the production of plastics instead of focusing on how to regulate the waste handling. And that in itself is just making things a lot more difficult. It seems to be that we forget that plastics are indeed the enablers of this energy transition journey that we're all on. And as enablers, if we make it much more difficult by over-regulating, it's just going to make it harder to produce, and you're creating a lot more demand on products that will not be viable. So we're forgetting that they are indeed the basic building blocks that's required to support the energy transition in that process. And I also think, aside from that point, is the fact that this trying to put regulations that are one size fits all on the whole globe doesn't really make sense. Each region and each area has a different set of circumstances. So I think that's all overlooked when they're setting regulations. So I think we still have a large gap that we need to close, and I think our industry needs really to get its voice across a bit more effectively in doing so.
Yeah. That's something we've been talking about for decades now, right? on a lot of different fronts. So Jeff, I know you were making the rounds. You were in DC last week. I know you were at some other industry meetings. Maybe I'll focus in a little bit on U.S. market, which is your home court. What's the prevailing sentiment around fuels policy in the U.S. now?
Yeah, when we talked last week, I was in Washington for the API board meeting. To be clear, the closest I got to Capitol Hill was the API offices, and that suits me just fine. I'm happy with that. But yeah, I think some of the policy proposals and actually rules that I see coming out of the regulators in this country, one thing that concerns me is that they're very, very much focused on electric vehicle mandates and the flip side of that coin, which is internal combustion engine bans. And that, which actually says to the liquid fuels industry, you're not part of the solution. No matter what the carbon intensity of your life cycle of your fuels are, you can't be part of the solution. And when I reflect on 35 years now in this business and all of the the intelligent and creative people that are working in this industry, in Motiva, in Aramco more broadly, in the industry more broadly, and the problems that this industry has solved over the years, delivering on low sulfur fuels, delivering on IMO 2020, keeping the world supplied with fuels during the pandemic and then the recovery after the pandemic. The global refining complex, when faced with a market challenge, can do amazing things. It has done amazing things because of the talented people that are there. And I think with the right market signals, the things that to look at, decarbonization is about total supply chain carbon.
Right.
It's about respecting and preserving consumer demand for what the consumer wants in a vehicle, what the consumer wants in a fuel.
Yep.
I think if that kind of a policy framework that doesn't just dial in on tailpipe and doesn't just dial in on zero electric or electric vehicles, could engage the creativity, the talents of this massive industry, and could cause better solutions to come about.
Yeah. No, so what do we need a carbon price? Would that help?
I think that I got to be careful here, but I think that broadly, I know that broadly speaking, I think I certainly think that pricing carbon is the most effective way. You have to do it. You have to do it in a way that's economical. It has to be efficient. It has to be critically economy-wide. You can't just price carbon in one sector or another sector. It has to be the whole economy. It has to be in a way that preserves consumer choice. But I think that we just talked about API. API, I think, has put out in public quite a thoughtful position on what the elements of carbon pricing would have to be in order for it to be effective. I think that's a good, they put together a thoughtful guideline on that, and certainly that's the kind of thing that I think would work.
Right. No, thanks. So Alfred, your thoughts, I guess, I'd be interested on your thoughts on market pricing, market signals. Do you have those? EU's a bit more prescriptive, right? And then maybe your thoughts on kind of this, you touched on a little bit earlier, with the SAF mandates, right? But this idea of going from bio today to non-bio longer term.
Yeah, maybe I'll start off with a kind of an obvious thing, but I think that's always useful to go back to that. Sustainability is not just CO2 in the air, right? Sustainability has 3 P's in there. It's people, planet, and profit. Yeah, if we run out of money and if we can't finance the transformation anymore, that's the end of the sustainability transformation. And that's why at OMV we have put sustainability as an innovation and growth driver, not as a cost, because it doesn't work, right? And if you take that concept, of course, the key challenge or the key issue that we need to all work against is CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere. We have developed a great language globally that is understood by everyone, and that's money. Yeah, and putting then some cost to that can be helpful to drive the right economics if it's set up in an appropriate way to help companies to actually move forward. I'm a big fan, right? And the idea is always to be prescriptive and to come with solution and to projectize what we are doing. But in the end, the challenge that we have globally is so huge that only free market economy can drive the necessary change. It requires the right regulatory framework. Then entrepreneurs will come, companies will come, develop the technologies and innovate and provide the solutions. I think this is really key that we need to keep in mind and keep in front of us. And for that, it's of course extremely important to have a stable regulatory environment that is looking far enough out and that is giving time for companies to react. I always explain that on our refineries, we do turnarounds every 5 years or so. Yeah, so up until 2030, in some of my refineries, I will have one more turnaround where I can make all the changes that are required to reduce my Scope 1, Scope 2 emissions, to get new products in and so on. And there's not many more until 2040. Yeah, and I think that's the thing. And the lifetime of our assets is some 50 plus years. So I think that's really quite critical to keep in mind. But maybe just a little bit for regulatory environment, I think one of the biggest changes that we'll see coming next year in Europe is the requirement for stock-listed companies to provide a combined report, right? A combined annual report. This year, we still provided a report with our financials and an extra report with non-financials. As of next year, there will be one report that will be audited also by the auditing companies. So CO2 emissions, ESG metrics will be audited just like financials. And that is not just by coincidence. It is because investors, financial institutions, banks will start looking at this. That is, of course, driving the things in a certain direction that are all relevant for us, because in the end, access to competitive capital and everything is key in order to drive our companies forward. Then flowing from there, there's all kind of regulations, both on plastic waste or waste in general, on fuel mandates, on decarbonization. In Germany, every city now that is more than 100,000 people has to develop a decarbonization plan for their city. And that does not just include electricity, but also heating in those cities. So this will unleash incredible amount of innovation, incredible amount of investment opportunities, but it will require innovation and stable regulatory frameworks in order to make this happen and to make this profitable. I do think it's an opportunity that can be used, and the companies that recognize that and are willing to use this as an opportunity can get great business out of this.
So you mentioned technology, right? So I want to shift the conversation here in the last 8 minutes or so that we have, and talk a little bit about technology and outlook, right? Nadia, I want to come to you maybe on you mentioned plastics, recycling. How optimistic are you on the technology in that space? I know you've been looking at different things.
I think if you say exciting and optimistic, coming back to Jeff and talking about what's not exciting is, the stuff that we've been doing all along. But I think it's exciting to see how AI can help enhance that and take it to the next level. Okay. So although we've been talking about, efficiencies and flaring and supply chain optimization and all of those good things, safety and emissions and all of that, it's taking it to the next level through AI. So I think I find that to be, something that is an optimistic or something that we can be a little bit excited about. Plus unlocking value that, it has the potential to unlock. So maybe that's something that we can all be excited about, and seeing how far we can take that to the benefit of everybody involved. And I think second thing that I'm excited about is also our young talent. I think in our system, and I'm sure it's the same across the board, we've got a lot of youngsters that have entered the system that are not just tech savvy, but they're very enthusiastic. They're passionate about the planet and all that entails. And from what I've seen in the young talent that we have in our system in Kuwait, it makes me very proud to see them be part of this journey and how effectively we can utilize them to sort of get to where we need to be. So that's the other thing.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and I think we're going to need a lot more, a lot more, right? As we
they're the ones that have the innovation, and they're the ones that can bring in the fresh thinking, and if we can do that, I think we'll be.
We got so much to build, right? We got so many things to build, and so much infrastructure. I'm going to come to you, Jeff, on infrastructure, technology, just maybe your broad thinking right around the steps we're taking to reduce emissions, either yourself or what you see in the industry.
Well, I'll talk about Motiva. We're as you know, we operate the largest and arguably one of the most complex refineries in North America in Port Arthur. Dan's going to fact check me on that before we're done. But and because of that having that kind of scale and complexity, this lets us do some things at scale that people that operate smaller and less complex refineries can't do as much. Right. So we by the way, I also going to go on record right now as saying refining is exciting. I just want to just want to say that. So we are doing some of the things that Nadia mentioned, application of AI to advanced process controls, and really exciting stuff that even after 150 years in the refining industry, you can still squeeze a lot of efficiency out by improving the process controls. It's really remarkable. We're planning a plastics advanced plastics recycling pilot with our sister Aramco company, CERAWEEK. The permitting environment is kind of different on this side of nothing as ambitious as what Dr. Stern talked about, but also in the plans and just the electrification and cogen and the kind of things you do to squeeze out energy efficiency. And then the other thing we haven't talked about so much that you can do when you have a large and complex facility is also shifting of the product slate, right? So much more shifting of the product slate from fuels and into materials, lubricants, materials, and chemicals. And we have projects underway in construction right now to extract molecules from the gasoline pool, produce more plastics, and also larger projects under development. And this is, of course, all part of Aramco does have a net zero by 2050 target. We, as a wholly owned subsidiary, are part of that target. We will also work to deliver it. I think if you heard Mr. Nasser talk Monday morning, he talked about this 3 million barrel a day shift of liquids to chemicals that are happening Aramco-wide, and we will play our small part in that also by shifting more of our production into chemicals.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So you're shifting your capital deployment, right? Which is what I wanted to ask Alfred about, right? About how you think about your capital allocation and how you're balancing, the traditional being, supplying reliable, affordable, traditional fuels as you're, pivoting and investing for these future fuels that you talked about.
Yeah, I think that actually a great question, because what we are seeing, of course, is that back a little bit to the regulatory environment, we see in Europe that in addition to the ETS, to the CO2 trading system that mainly affected industry, a lot of the countries have now introduced CO2 pricing for road fuels and also for heating of the houses, right? So that cost is going up, and at the same time, there's quite a few subsidies that are being given to change heating, for example, to heat pumps, also electric cars with subsidies. So what we are seeing as an effect is that the demand in the markets is starting to shift and starting to change. So because of this, we are taking about 40% of our capex every year. That's about 1.5 billion euros. We put this 1.5 billion euros in sustainable projects every year. It's around those drivers that I told you in energy, for example, geothermal, in fuels, sustainable fuels, and in chemicals, recycled chemicals. So about 40% of our capex is going into those investments, so that we can, in average up until 2030, so it's ramping up a bit by 2030, so that we can build a pipeline of products and production in order to be fit for the future, if you want. Of course, it is also a race to the finish line, because at this moment there's quite a few subsidy schemes that can be used to de-risk some of these investments and accelerate them in order to be one of the first ones in the markets. But of course, it does require quite a lot of focus, quite a lot of innovation, developing these things and keeping up security of supply for our customers for the current product. So it is a difficult task to manage those things, to keep managing safe and reliable plants, security of supply, and at the same time scaling up as fast as possible new technologies to be more sustainable.
That's great. So I think hopefully we held the promise of we're optimistic. This is the energy transition. I'm struck right by the progress that we're making, the people that we have to do it, and we are going to be, I think, as a downstream industry, I say we will be part of the energy transition, part of the decarbonization of the downstream. So with that, I want to invite you to thank the speakers.
Thank you.
and enjoy the rest of the week.
Thank you.